Hi, everybody. Welcome to Hallmarkies podcast. And we are really excited today. We are feeling a little bit old because Pride and Prejudice 2005 is celebrating its 20th birthday this month and it's back in theaters. Very exciting. And so we thought it'd be fun to do a deep dive and talk about this iconic film. And I'm film critic Rachel Wagner, and my friend Conrado Falco is here with me, my co-host of the Criterion Project we did for multiple years. And Conrado, welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast.
Thank you for having me. Now, we've done a lot of podcasting together. I
Yes,
cannot remember whether or not this is my first time on Hallmarkies. I don't know
I
if it is.
I think it is. I think you've done Talking Disney. I think you've done some of the other stuff, but I don't think you've ever been on here, which is interesting because I think part of the reason we became friends is that we both like rom-coms.
That is true. That is true. Although I think the Hallmark movies are kind of like outside of my expertise.
Yeah.
That's kind of like advanced rom-comming, you know.
Yeah.
I'm a little yeah, but I'm very happy to be here because mainly because of that, it's been rare to have me on the show, you know. So I'm glad that it's the down season
Yeah.
as we know, and the Christmas movies are
Yeah.
not coming out just yet, and we can talk
Yes.
about something else.
Yeah. So I guess why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners, and I guess what is it that draws you to a good romantic comedy for you?
Okay, so I am Conrado. I used to host the Criterion Project with Rachel we did it for several years, like
Yeah,
four
we did.
years or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a good run. Um, and now I'm moving on to other kinds of projects, and got busy, so we've put the show on the shelf. But it was a great time. All those episodes are still available for anyone
Yeah.
who wants to listen. It was a show where we talked about movies in the Criterion Channel or Criterion Collection, and we had a lot of great guests over the
Yeah.
years on that podcast. So there's a lot of cool episodes, including episodes about romantic comedies. We did a couple screwball comedies, which I
Mhm.
would say those are really my favorite types of romantic comedies. I do love the comedy part of it, and I do love a movie where the romance and the comedy kind of like mesh together, you know? So something like It Happened One Night is one of my favorite movies. One that really started to become my favorite after we covered it on Criterion Project, actually. And in that movie, you can see how it is the banter, it is the comedy between the two characters who start out not liking each other that makes them grow into a romantic couple, and discover that
Yeah.
they are special and they are something for each other. So that's the kind of thing that I love. Um, the Shop Around the Corner, another one we did on Criterion Project, which is also that way. The Lady Eve. So I love all of those kinds of movies, and I think that's really what I'm looking for in my romantic comedy. Not a lot of those lately. And
Yeah. Oh, and especially if you're talking features, you pretty much have to go to streaming or Hallmark in order to get your rom com these days.
yeah, and I think, I mean, you are much more, connected to the world of rom-coms than I am, Rachel. In my experience, it's been really hard to find a rom-com in the last couple years or decades, really, that captures that sort of like banter that is like combative but also witty, and that you can believe that people are falling in love. Like to me, the most effective romantic comedy, and this shows why I'm kind of a sicko, is of recent years is Phantom Thread, which is not really, that, but
Yeah.
to me, it's about two people who are really, specific and fuzzy and difficult in their
Yeah.
own way, like, those screwball guys
Mhm.
who end up coming together.
Yeah,
So
I think the best that we get these days is, I guess, maybe something like an Emma or historical rom com or something that sort of meshes genres. Like we might get like Sing Street, sort of is like
mhm.
it is a rom com, but like it's also like a coming of age story, and it's also that kind of a thing maybe.
Yeah, like a supporting, one
Yeah.
of the subplots is the
Hmm.
romantic part, and you do get that still.
Hmm.
And of course there are attempts to revive the romantic comedy. I'm still waiting for the one that really clicks for me,
Yeah.
you know. I know there's that movie coming out later this year, The Materialists,
Oh,
which I hope
so
that's really
excited.
good. I'm excited for that one.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. But let's dive in to Pride and Prejudice 2005. So this is really interesting because we're going to get into the weeds with it because it tries a lot of different things. But I guess before it was this your introduction to Pride and Prejudice? Had you seen any other versions before?
This is the only filmed version of Pride and Prejudice that I've ever seen.
Okay.
And back
Yeah.
in 2005, 20 years ago,
Uh-huh.
when it came out, although it was actually probably closer to 2006 when I saw it because it was
Okay.
on DVD. But anyway, when I first saw it, it was my first encounter with Pride and Prejudice at all. It was probably my first Jane Austen at all as well, and I loved it. You know, I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
great, and it remained one of my favorites through the years. Um, what is different about this recording is that for this preparation,
Mm-hmm.
I actually read the book, which I'd never done. I
Nice.
had never
Yeah.
read any Jane Austen books, and we can talk more about my experience with the book.
Now you've read Pride and Prejudice. I guess what did you think?
So I had a great time with the book. I guess the middle section I thought I was went a little
Uh-huh.
long, you know, but I
Uh-huh.
think the beginning and the last section of the books I had a great time with.
Yeah.
I was surprised I had heard over the years that this 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice was quite different in tone from the book.
Mhm.
And, you know, and I always had, because I love the movie so much, I always was like, oh, those people don't know what they're talking about. It's a great movie. But then reading the book, I was like, oh, yeah, it is very different, actually.
Yeah. Well, the biggest problem with the movie, I love the movie, but the biggest problem is that it does feel very rushed.
It
And they
does.
they were so focused on Keira Knightley, I think, as the star and her leading and her changing, make it very Elizabeth focused that pretty much all of the secondary plots are all very rushed. I mean, you
Hmm.
barely see Wickham, you barely see Lydia, you barely Jane and Bingley are an afterthought. I mean, these are all pretty major like plots of the book. And so
Yeah.
I can see why there are some purists who bristle at that, you know, and that and I don't know why they necessarily felt a need to make it so rushed. That they could have easily added another half an hour to this movie and nobody would have really like batted an eye. It could have it's 2:08. It could have been 2.5 hours, and I don't think anybody would have been
I
bothered by that.
think I very much agree with that. It's but I never thought of it as rushed, although I hadn't seen it in a long time, to be honest. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, probably about 10 or so years since the last time I saw it, but I didn't remember as being rushed. But after reading the book, it did feel like, oh my God, this is like a Cliff Notes, like, you know, or like a YouTube recap
Yeah.
kind of a thing. It was like going by so quick. Um, which is good in its own way, but not, I think the movie would have benefited from a little bit more time. Um, and I don't really mind that it wants to focus on Elizabeth, but I do think that the problem is that it chooses to include these other plots, but just like rush through them instead of
Yeah.
giving them the, you know, also the, what's the friend's name? Charlotte, and
Yeah.
what's the name of the
Collins.
Mr.
Mr.
Collins? Yeah,
Collins.
that is very rushed. It like there's one good scene about it, but you don't really see it like hitting the way that it does in the book, or
Yeah.
like it's not as much of a thing. So I definitely agree with that. And the other thing that I found quite different was to me, reading the book, I thought it was like a comedy. I was laughing left and right. I thought it was such a great satire of all of these norms of the way that
Yeah.
people have to behave. And, you know, Mr. Darcy, this like pompous jerk. And then you have Elizabeth, and, you know, Mrs. Bennet is so funny in the book. So is Mr. Bennet. And, you know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
to, and then the movie is much more romance focused and much more focused on that element of it, which I don't think it's a bad thing to do, but I do think it changes quite a bit my experience from what I took away from the book was much more different than what I had taken away from the movie, especially in my early viewings of it.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Collins is a good example of that. I mean, he's really not that foppish in this interpretation in this film. He's not that ridiculous. And so when Lizzie says, but he's ridiculous to Charlotte. It kind of feels like really he seemed pretty normal, like for that
Yeah.
time, and so and yeah, Mrs. Bennett, she's a lot more subdued. And everything in this movie feels kind of, they call it the muddy hem version. And
Mm.
you feel it, everything feels a little bit grittier, a little bit dirtier, and than in the book, certainly, or in other period pieces, Regency.
Which I don't necessarily mind because I do think that that part of it, the movie is really the Elizabeth who walks through the fields to get to the estate to see Jane, right? And
Yeah,
her hem is muddied and whatever. I understand what
yeah,
people are getting at with that reference. That's the aesthetic of the movie. I think wants to be a little bit more romantic, not only in romantic love as we know it, but like in the literary tradition, the
yeah.
kind of like that like connection to like all this like emotion and the nature and all of that stuff, which I don't really think is what Jane Austen was going for in the book. I don't think she's a romantic in that way. And so it feels like the movie's trying to strain a little bit into something a little bit more modern, maybe because it wants to refresh it or make it
Yeah.
palpable to the new audiences, and it loses a little bit of the Jane Austen touch.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing about Jane Austen, is that her books are ostensibly about romance, and you could make an argument that they aren't actually, but most people consider them romantic books, but they have almost no romantic dialogue.
Right.
There's very little banter, and and like, for instance, when Darcy finally proposes, she says something like, "He said what was appropriate for a man desperately in love," and I'm like, "No, I
Yeah.
don't know what's that." And
Yeah, I heard in my research I heard some people who've read more Austen than me say that Jane Austen never wrote a successful proposal. Like all the proposals that she goes into detail in the books are always the bad ones. There is the bad
yeah,
proposal of Darcy in the
that's
book, which
true. Yeah,
which in the book is even worse than in the movie. I think that in the book he comes off as a real jerk in that
yeah.
proposal. It's like,
The
you must marry me. Like he expects her to like fall at his feet, and it's like, get out of here.
Yeah. The closest that you get is in Emma. Because
Hmm.
Knightley and Emma were friends for so long, and this kind of her version of sort of a friends to lovers sort of story. And so they have the most banter, and they have the most of a proposal
Hmm.
in that one. But yeah, it's the interesting thing. And yeah, we could do a whole podcast episode about how is Jane Austen's, are they only tangentially about romance? Because it's really, I think you could make an interesting argument that these books are actually more coming of age novels than they
Hmm.
are romances, because that's what women had to come of age of.
Yeah.
That was the choices that they had. And really, like, all of her heroines are really quite bold for the era. I mean, for Lizzie to refuse Darcy is kind of insane, for especially
Yeah.
given the condition of her family, the position. For her to even refuse Collins is kind of nuts
It
for that
is
era.
all, I think it's a great social commentary that she's
Mm.
doing. It reminded me of a director that we both like and who did a Jane Austen adaptation himself, Whit Stillman, right? And not
Yes.
just of Love and Friendship, which is hilarious, but his other movies, more
Yeah.
contemporary,
Metropolitan.
Metropolitan, where he is poking fun at the social norms of the upper
Yeah.
classes of that time, just like Jane Austen is doing back then, like the idea of, and it's more complicated than you would think because you have someone like Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet, right? Mrs. Bennet is obsessed with getting her kids married, her daughters married, and Mr. Bennet is constantly making fun of her. But it's like, dude, she has to do this because when you die, she's gonna be
Yeah.
in the poorhouse if she
Right.
doesn't do this, and you're making fun of her like you're
Yeah.
not doing anything, you're just sitting down reading your books.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of like she sees both sides and she thinks that everything's a little ridiculous, but there is a reason why people behave that way as well.
Well, there's that line in this one where Mrs. Bennet says to Lizzie, when you have daughters that need to get married, then we can have this
Yeah.
conversation, or something like that. Ho, ho, ho. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast, especially at Christmas?
Do you enjoy the holiday previews, recaps, interviews, and bonus episodes?
If the answer is yes, please consider supporting the Hallmarkies Patreon. We need your help to do what we do both during the Christmas season and all year round.
But not only do you help a podcast led by strong, independent women by becoming a Patreon, you get to become a part of the Hallmarkies family.
Starting at only $2 a month as a patron, you will have access to our Facebook Patreon group where we talk about the movies, shows, and more all year.
We also have many monthly patron watch-alongs with guests like Lacey Chabert, Natalie Hall, Paul Campbell, Mary Lou Henner, and more, giving their behind-the-scenes details of their films.
As a patron, you also have the chance to provide input into the podcast and even join us at different tiers.
So this Christmas season, spread some cheer to the Hallmarkies Patreon and become a member today. You won't regret it.
Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies to learn more.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
The wiki on this movie is actually really good, very interesting. And there were a bunch of things that I was fascinated by. And you might be interested to know. So Joe Wright, this was his debut movie, which is kind of amazing. He'd done TV work, I think, before. And he actually was just like you. He read the script before reading the novel.
I'm not surprised after seeing the movie and reading the novel myself that he did that. But I do think let's talk a little bit about what we do like about the movie, right? Because I think we've been a little bit. I think that I do appreciate the way he approaches it in the techniques. I think the production design, the grittiness that we're talking about, I think is cool. And the costume design and the production design, I think the costumes say a lot. They're very well done, I think, by Jacqueline Durand, who's an incredible costume designer. And I think they're very good at telling you what kind of character each person is, what they're wearing says a lot. And they feel realistic. They don't feel like they're just a costume drama that all the costumes were made yesterday for this movie. They feel lived in. And then the cinematography, of course, and the music is beautiful, and all of those tracking shots around the house, which I think is what he's also really great at, is the moments in which we see the family and the sisters, and he goes from one to the other in those long shots and what they're doing, and we can see, or at the party, at one of the balls when he goes from one character to another, and you get the sense of this big family, that everyone has something going on. A lot is happening in that house. Everything is back and forth, all the sisters. And I think he captures that really well from the novel in a way that doesn't feel, like too stagey or too, like we're cutting from one person to another. And then, it's just, it all flows. Everyone's talking over each other. Like, I think he does that really, really well. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. So many things there that I agree with. There's so many beautiful shots. Like, I love that when she says that line about how even if it's someone barely tolerable, and Mr. Darcy realized that she was listening, she knows. And then it zooms back, but he's in the center of the shot. And so it's following him and his reaction all the way to the back of the room. And, so that's like just really good filmmaking there. So there's so many moments like that. But the way I look at this movie is that, like, the 1995 miniseries with Colin Firth, that is a perfect adaptation, almost word for word. It's almost identical to the book, and great. And who could be more iconic than Colin Firth as Darcy? Incredible. That's already been done. Like, the perfect adaptation has already been done. And if we didn't have that and all we got was 2005, I'd be like, I don't know. But we already got it. So what are you going to do next? Either don't make the movie or do something different. And so I appreciate that this did so many different things. And to me, that made it like interesting. And to me, it's like very swoony and fun. And I really enjoyed it, even if it's not perfect.
I do. I think you make a great point. Not only do you already have the miniseries version, but the miniseries version was huge and it's so popular, and it was part of this huge Austen revival in the 90s, right? It was probably the most important part of it. Maybe Sense and Sensibility was a big part of it too, but
we even had Colin Firth playing
in Bridget Jones,
Darcy in Bridget Jones. I mean, that's how iconic that role was. You're never going to be able to match that.
So that is just the iconic version. So I totally agree with you. I think that I like that the movie tries to go for something different. I do think it's interesting because now I think we have reached the age, 20 years later, where there's a lot of people around for whom the 2005 version is the iconic definitive one, And that
And
feels strange.
yeah, you know what's so interesting too is that, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but there's parts of this movie that now have become so ingrained in the populace that people think it's part of Jane Austen. They think it's part of the novel. Like
Oh yeah.
particularly that "you bewitched me body and soul,"
Oh
that
right,
line,
because
people think that's in the novel. And I'm like, no, it's not in the
and that
novel.
and that yeah, and haven't read the novel, it would feel kind of out of place in the way
Yeah,
that the novel
yeah,
is written. So yeah, totally. It does change the tone to something that I don't know. I mean I still like the movie a lot, but having read the book, I understand so much more. I am so much more generous to the people who don't like the movie because
yeah,
I'm like, you know what? I get it. It's very
yeah.
different.
So what's so interesting is that they decided to set the movie in an earlier time period than the technical Regency time period that the book is set in. So this is set in like the late 1700s as opposed
Hmm.
to the early 1800s, I think is what it is.
Which I think is around the time that Jane Austen would have started to write the first version of the novel or something like that, right? Definitely a time
Mm,
that she lived through, but not when the novel was
right.
published.
Yes. And what that does, that allows them to do is it allows them to have more of those gritty. You're thinking this is like just before you've got like this is the time of like the colonies and
Hmm. And the
those
French
kind of
Revolution and all that.
it's just a more sort of gritty in England at least time than your Regency time period. And the and so this was a strategy, I guess originally. So Deborah Magach was the one who did the screenplay, and says it said she initially attempted to make her script as faithful to the novel as possible, writing from Elizabeth's perspective while preserving much of the original dialogue in the novel. Wright encouraged her greater deviation from the text. And it's so funny because I think a big reason why he wanted to do this is that he, for some reason, who knows why, he hates Empire waist dresses. So right. He didn't want, so Jacqueline Duran had to make all of these like, and I think setting an earlier time allowed for this different look.
Hmm.
And she said that a generational divide was established. The older characters dress in mid 18th century fashions, while the young wear a sort of proto Regency style hair and dress. And so like Lady Catherine, Judy Dench in it is like wearing sort of an older look, a different style than Elizabeth and the other characters, which I think you can totally see that.
Yeah. And I do think that the movie, in that you can see that the movie was willing to break the molds of what was expected from a Jane Austen adaptation in a lot of ways that still feel refreshing to this day, because what have we had since then? We've had, in big screen adaptations, you had Love and Friendship, and then you have the new version of Emma,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I think
Yeah.
both go back to an aesthetic that I think you might expect a little bit more with Jane Austen in terms of everything is very kind of like designed and manicured in a way, right? This is
Yeah.
like you say, it's gritty. You have the Roman camera, the long shots, the editing is different. The music is swelling in a way that feels more, like we said, like romantic, or it feels more of
Yeah.
that kind of like Wuthering Heights kind of like feeling.
What
Um, yeah.
What's really funny is that Joe Wright said he had only seen the 1940 version previous to this, which is kind of hilarious because the 1940 version is set in like Victorian era. So they have like the big puffy dresses and and it's like completely not true to the book, like even way worse than this. They have Lady Catherine in that version is like a busybody matchmaker. And
Hmm.
she makes her visit to Lizzie in order to just check on her, make sure she's really a good match for so it's like it's that's very interesting to me when I read that I'm like, oh, okay. So like the only version that he had seen, he was this very divergent version. I
Hmm.
thought that was interesting.
I also think that the movie does take a little bit of that, not only in the aesthetic, but in the character of Elizabeth and how it portrays it and how close it is to Elizabeth.
Mhm.
It takes a much more modern point of view, you know,
Yeah.
in
I
the way
wanted to
that,
talk to you about this because
yeah,
what's so interesting, I think, about this movie is that they are focusing more on Lizzie and her change and her growth, but also I think they make the more sort of modern choice of making Darcy, he's just kind of shy. He's not really that
yeah.
much of a jerk.
And that
Sort
was
of
a huge
awkward.
revelation for me in the reading the book. It was like, oh yeah, in the movie he is just shy and not saying the thing,
Yeah.
and he's coming off as a standoffish because he's keeps to himself. But the story of the book is that he is kind of a jerk at the beginning, and he is this rich person who believes in his superiority because he's living in this place, you know, this culture with nobility and high rank where everything is so specific, and he learns to be different through
Yeah.
his relationship with Elizabeth. In the movie, he's great from the beginning. She just can't see it because it's been
Yeah.
hidden, which I
Yeah.
do think that takes a little bit away. And her journey at the same time, her journey is justified, though. The movie doesn't say she was wrong to act the way she does. In fact, she feels like a little bit more of a more modern woman who's like criticizing. The way she talks to Lady Catherine, for example, feels to me in some of the scenes a little bit like, I don't know, would she be so straightforward about what
Mm-hmm.
she's saying and the kinds of things that she's saying to all these people who are higher ranked than she is? And because
Yeah.
in the book, as you would expect, or as you see in a Whit Stillman movie, she does it very kind of like she's very witty and she has very hilarious cutting things to say, but she couches them in all this kind of like appropriate language that makes the book so funny and so
Yeah.
clever. And in the movie, she's much more direct.
Yeah. I mean, like in the book, she says to Lady Catherine, he is a gentleman, I am a gentleman's daughter. So like everything is all sort of more like less out of anger and more out of like logic. I'd like to take a second to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's If Tomorrow Never Comes by Allison Ashley. This is the new novel that introduces us to Elliot Holland, who decides to live it up on the eve of a stem cell transplant to treat her leukemia. It's destiny when she crosses paths with handsome and charming Jamie Sullivan. The chemistry is magic, so is a beautiful evening that ends with a bittersweet kiss goodbye and no expectations of ever seeing each other again. But 1 year later, their paths cross again, and it's a lot of fun to see what is going to happen. If Tomorrow Never Comes by Allison Ashley is the perfect emotional and heartfelt title for your April TBR. It's a deeply romantic read for those wanting a love story about the right person, but maybe the wrong time, cross paths, and fated mates. Available to order now through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Bookshop, or your local bookstore, or use the affiliate link below. That's If Tomorrow Never Comes by Allison Ashley. Check it out today. Keira Knightley, she said that she believed Elizabeth is what you aspire to be. She's funny, she's witty, and intelligent. She's fully rounded and a very much beloved character.
Yeah,
And
I think that tracks for the version that we see in the movie. I think Keira
mhm,
Knightley is really good at capturing that, but I do also think that the movie goes into it knowing that we already think of Elizabeth Bennet as an iconic character that we all want to be, you know,
mhm,
or at least maybe all the women in the audience, or I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
whoever, everybody could want to be here, but um, and it takes that a little bit for granted, you know. I also watched, for example, the Ang Lee version of Sense and Sensibility before doing this podcast,
mhm,
and in that movie, I think it benefits from having the two sisters, but I think it makes it a little bit more balanced, where you are like, there's good qualities to both of them. None of them is quite perfect in their own way. I don't know. This
mhm,
movie feels a little bit loaded towards Lizzie, and it makes Jane a little bit of a she comes up a little bit dumb, just partially because
yeah.
the sister, what's the name of the sister? The
Jane or
no,
Lydia.
no, the one, Darcy's sister, not Darcy's,
Oh,
Bingley's, Mrs. Bingley, right?
Caroline. Caroline. Yeah,
Caroline Bingley. Yeah,
yeah,
she is played so evil in this movie. You're like, how
yeah,
could you think that this lady has anything but terrible thoughts about you? You know, like, so
yeah,
it makes her seem a little, because yeah, in the book it's a little bit more balanced. Here she's like so scheming that you're
yeah.
like, you can't trust this girl. Jane, what are you doing?
Yeah. There's so many, again, we could have like a whole episode on it, but there's so many interesting things about Caroline because when you deep dive into the novel, so the Bingleys are looked on with a certain degree of derision by the gentleman class, by the because they would have been they would have received their income by way of trade, and
Mm,
as opposed to being a noble, and so that is part of the reason why Caroline is such a snob, is because she's like, there's like a defensiveness there of
yeah.
like she they, because they got their she knows where they're not a landed elite, and
Hmm.
so there's so many interesting layers that you can dive into. You can literally spend people have written whole dissertations on just like one character or chapters or whatever. So in the 1995 film, I don't know if this is not too much of a spoiler, but they have an added scene where you see Darcy struggling and agonizing, and then he swims. This is iconic dive into the lake, and that's before she sees him in Pemberley. And I think the emotional equivalent to that scene in this movie is Elizabeth in that room with the statues in
Oh,
Pemberley.
sure.
All of this I might have been mistress of. And
Hmm.
the way that she's, it's almost similar to like a dive in a pool, the way she's going along those statues and feeling that kind of thing. And I don't know,
I
I just think
think
that's interesting.
I think you're making a good point, and I do think that that scene is very clever at because when you look at it from a certain perspective, even in the book, you might be thinking, I know I was in at certain points like, oh, okay. So now you come to the big house and you realize how much money he actually has, and now you want to
Yeah.
marry him. So that's what's going to convince you. But in the movie, they make a really good point of making it the statues. And if it's not just that he has all of the splendor in his house, but that it's art, and
Yeah.
Elizabeth feels connected to that the way that she feels. It's more than just money. It's like he's putting the money to try to find something beyond the
Yeah.
material, right? Which I think is what speaks to her in the movie, which I think is a good way of modernizing it and to make it more palpable. But again, I'm repeating myself, but I do think that also goes hand in hand with making it a little bit more capital R romantic, and more in touch with that tradition.
Yeah. One of the most iconic parts of this movie and making it more romantic is the hand flex.
The
So
hand flex, which
yeah.
okay, I wanted to run this by you because I
Yeah.
heard that that's actually it's taken from the adaptation of Persuasion
Oh, okay.
from the 90s
Yeah.
that it happens there and it happens. Is that true? Is that also in there?
Yeah. It's not as, it would be more subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
It
they
would be
took it
more
up a
subtle.
notch
Yeah. They took it
because I
up
know
a
people are
notch.
obsessed with this moment of the hand
Yeah.
flex, right?
I mean, it's a very romantic thought. And I think that I was actually just talking to a romance author before we came on here, that one of the great things about a good romance novel is if they can develop, especially clean romance where you have so limited eroticism, but when they can develop a sense of touch between the characters, like from an early use, oh, there's just a little touch here, a little touch there. Then when you get to your big moment, if you have that moment, then you've got that chemistry. It's so helpful in building chemistry. And I think that having this hand flex, it just makes us like him.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
just we just like him because, oh, look, he's, like, especially women, like that's a very romantic thought that, like, oh, somebody is like
Yeah.
just responding to our touch. It's very romantic.
And it does go very well with the movie's version of Darcy, that is the shyness of it all, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the unspokenness, the things he doesn't say out of that, which I think in the book is more out of society and like hierarchy and stuff that he won't say certain things, but in the movie it's just much more personal and much more attached to his feelings, which I think it works dramatically, even
Yeah.
if it's different from the book.
So Joe Wright he said one alteration concerned politeness. Wright noted that while Austen's work had characters waiting before speaking, he believed that particularly in big families of girls, everyone tends to speak over each other, finishing each other's sentences, etc. So I felt the Bennett family's conversations would be overlapping like that,
Yeah,
which
I
I think
think
is interesting.
going back to I think what I was trying to get at in terms of how he depicts a family, which I think it's one of the best, the most successful parts of the movie,
Yeah.
one that I think shouldn't change in any adaptation going
Mm.
forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as somebody, I have three sisters, so I could definitely
Mhm.
understand that. And I think they all it's so interesting how everything all falls into place because it's set in an earlier time. They have the grittier costumes, they have the different that it it all works, I think, for what they were trying to do. And the and Keira Knightley, she said that she'd been an Austen fan since the age of 7, but initially feared taking the role out of apprehension that she would be doing a copy of Jennifer Ellie's performance, which she deeply admired.
Hmm. That's from
So,
the miniseries, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. This
And
was. Oh, go
do you
ahead.
think she's very different, I assume, right? Or do you think she is similar in performance?
I think they're definitely different. I would say that this version of Lizzie is also kind of similar to Darcy, a little more quiet, a little more thoughtful. She's keeping things to herself. She doesn't like talk to Jane as much. She doesn't talk to, she's just writing her diary as opposed to talking to Jane.
Hmm.
Just in general, I would say she's sort of more thoughtful and contemplative than the 1995 version of Lizzie.
Okay. I do
Yeah.
think the casting in this movie is pretty great for the
Hmm.
most part. I mean, my
Yeah.
my one complaint in performance wise is I already told you is that Caroline, I think it's
Too much.
it's telegraphed a little too much how scheming she is, but other than that, I think most everybody does a great job. I love Tom Hollander as Mr. Collins. I think is really good, even though he's not as, foppish as you were saying from the book. I think it works for this version, because he makes him believable as a person,
Hmm.
that you would think while still being ridiculous in his own way of like how much he cares about Lady Catherine's like, importance to him and whatnot. I think the guy who plays Bingley is also really good casting. He's not in the movie that much, but I think he
Hmm.
sells the fact that he's just like, not the smartest, but very sweet guy. And, you can see why Jane might like him. The sisters are all good. Donald Sutherland as Mr. Bennet and Brenda Blethyn as Mrs. Bennet, I think are also really great.
Yeah, I also love Claudia Blakely as Charlotte. I think,
Mm-hmm.
especially the scene when she tells Lizzie,
Yeah.
you really feel her poverty in that scene.
Yeah, yeah.
You
And
know.
yeah, definitely. And it's very nice when they see each other again. And she also is really good at once she marries Mr. Collins, the you can see how she's trying to make it work. How
Mhm.
she's happy about it, but she doesn't love everything about it. And then she's
Yeah.
concerned. She thinks that the whole Lady Catherine is a little bit crazy, but she still has to respect it because it depends on her livelihood. I think she does a really good job. I think
Yeah.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I mean, I love that in the book when it's just like we found it was good for him to spend a lot of time in the garden. Mr. Mr. Collins.
Yeah. The book is really
Yeah.
funny. People who
Oh
have
yeah.
listened to this and haven't read the book, I really do recommend it. It's very easy to read. It moves really well. You can just read it, one chapter after another. As someone who doesn't read that many novels, I'm telling that it means something, and it's also so funny and so entertaining, and it's so
Hmm.
clever. So I do
Yeah.
really recommend it.
Yeah. So the cinematographer, this was interesting. Roman Osin, he said, broke many of the conventions of the period piece, often piercing through the glamorous settings to focus on the character's humanity. He kept the
Hmm.
camera moving in many of the scenes.
Yeah, I do think I have, okay, cinematography corner for me. The lighting, I think it's great. He does
Oh
an
yeah.
incredible job with the warm light and the greens and all of that. The moving camera and the tracking shots, really, really impressive and really well done. Going from one window to another and seeing a bunch of characters in the middle and catching up with all of them. I think that's great. The one cinematography choice that I don't love is the zooms. And
Mm,
like when there's a lot of zooming into people and zooming out at certain moments that I do think are a little much. I
mm,
think paired up with the fact that the movie feels so rushed already, it gives it like a frenetic quality that I feel like it was a little too much for me
I
coming
can
from
see
the
that.
book. Yeah.
I can see that. I do love that whole sequence when they do the time jump and you have Lizzie on the swing and then it
Hmm.
goes through like it's what 2 months 3 months whatever and you see sort of the passage of time and her swinging
Yeah.
on the swing that I love that whole sequence. Beautiful. We have to also talk about the score.
Hmm.
Dario Marianelli, absolutely just beautiful score.
Yep. Yeah. Great, great score. iconic, I would say, at this point, right? It
Yeah.
has to be one of the most I feel like I hear it in a lot of places. I don't know if it's in trailers or what, but I listen to it all the time when I'm writing and I want to put on
Yeah.
some music. That's a great, yeah, absolutely great score. Got an Oscar nomination. I think the movie got
I would
like
imagine
4 or 5 Oscars.
so.
It must be,
So Kira was nominated,
yes.
nominated for 4 Oscars.
Hmm.
So it was nominated. So Kira for Best Actress, Achievement in Art Direction,
Uh-huh.
and costumes
Costumes
and music. Yeah.
and original score. Great.
Yeah.
So all very well deserved nominations
Yes.
in my opinion. Could have gotten a couple more actually if it
I
was up to
agree.
me,
Yeah.
but those four are pretty great.
Yeah. And I feel like it's kind of unusual for an actress to be nominated for a movie like this. I don't know.
What
I
do you
mean,
mean by
like,
a
for
movie like
instance,
this?
well, I mean, I guess you had Florence Pugh and Little Women. I don't know. I just feel like these kinds of performances usually aren't, uh, I mean, romances in general usually aren't recognized. And,
Not a lot being made anymore,
mhm.
but
But I mean, I guess even Renee Zellweger was nominated for Bridget Jones. So what am I saying?
it might
I
have
don't
been
know.
a bit of a different
Yeah.
time. This was 2005 after all. It's
Yeah.
been 20 years, but yeah, I think Keira Knightley, from what I remember at the time, she was a bit of a surprise when the nomination
Yeah,
came
I
out.
think so.
It
That
was
makes,
not expected that she was gonna get it. But I remember being really happy that she did.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
of course, she didn't really have much of a chance of winning. It was Reese Witherspoon that year for Walk the Line, and she was running the table.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, another romance. So what do I know? But so let's talk about this proposal. So they made some so he starts out, he sees her in the at the house where the proposal is in the novel. And then they move it outside. So it's in the
Hmm.
rain. And what they do, so they do the proposal fairly, accurate to the book, but then they have this moment where they have this sort of near kiss. And that's extremely controversial. Some people just think, oh, that ruins the whole movie. Because why on
Hmm.
earth would Darcy want to kiss this woman who just like rejected him and said he was a horrible person, the last man on earth he'd ever want to marry? And why would she be sort of drawn to this person she hates? I don't know. What's your take on that? How do you feel?
It's difficult because I think the movie has a difficult task of conveying something that the book can do because in the book, Jane Austen does go into people's brains and tells us what they're thinking a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
we do know, which I also thought was a key difference from the book and the movie that I was shocked by reading the book for the first time, was that we know very early on that he likes Elizabeth, that he
Yeah.
finds her attractive,
We
which I
got the hand
didn't know.
touch.
Yeah, but in the book, it's like even right away, as soon as he meets her, Jane Austen says like, "Oh yeah, and by the way, he thinks that she's hot and he likes her a lot, but of course he can never say this because he's high rank and whatever."
Yeah.
But there's moments like that in the book. You can't have them in the movie, and you can't. It's hard to communicate in the movie with to find cinematic language to convey how hot he thinks she is. In the book, you can tell that he is like, anytime she speaks, she's like, and he, of course, was absolutely like dazzled. He's like a cartoon wolf, he's like the Tex
Yeah.
Avery wolf in some of the scene where when she's walking around the room with Caroline and she's teasing him and he's supposedly reading his book, but he's not really in the when reading the book, I was like, this guy is like, he's losing his mind. This girl is driving him crazy. In the movie, it's much harder to
Yeah.
convey that. So you have moments like the hand flex to reflect that. Um, I don't know how I feel about the kiss though. I think that's where it's coming from, of wanting to convey like this guy, he is so taken by her that even in this moment, he still wants her, but I don't know if it lands.
Yeah. I'm fine with it because I mean they're obviously trying to bring in the whole idea that that hate is just the mere emotion of love,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And so either way, they're feeling passionate towards each other. And so it's almost like it would be sort of an angry kiss,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is a romance convention not used by Austen, but
I was gonna say, I think if the movie was a little more comedic, it could have landed that a little bit more.
Mm.
The anger hate kiss,
But
of
I
how it.
think that also because Darcy hasn't really been that much of a jerk. Like if he was the way that he is in the book, and even in the 1995, if he was as much of a jerk, then I would have more than it would seem. But he hasn't. He's just been kind of shy and like I don't know. So I'm like
Yeah.
more
So it's
okay
that.
with it.
Mm, yeah. It does feel like a weird thing for him to do in that moment, given how he's been
Yeah,
characterized. But
yeah, I can see it both
yeah,
ways.
yeah. I was happy watching the movie this time because I had forgotten a little bit of what are the specifics of so many scenes, having not seen it in a while.
Yeah,
I thought they were about to kiss, and I was like, well, "That's
yeah.
crazy! What? No, this is horrible!" And then they don't, and I was relieved, So I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay, at least they didn't kiss."
Yeah, I love him giving the letter in this one, the way he
Mhm.
comes in and he gives it and you just feel so sorry for the guy,
Yeah,
which I've never felt in other depictions of Darcy. I've never felt so sorry for him.
that's the movie does have. Yeah, I mean, the movie takes a lot of swings, and
Yeah.
some of them pay off. I think that one pays off. I do like Lady Catherine coming in the middle of the night, even though
Oh, yeah.
it does feel a little bit to me like it's pushing into that modern Elizabeth hero direction, but I think it works because
Yeah.
her final triumph is not it's not really a triumph. She's very destroyed by it, Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's
She's very
true.
humiliated. She's in the middle of the night. Her whole family is there, and the moment afterwards, after Lady Catherine leaves, and her family is still asking her what's going on, and she's just like screaming, "Just leave me alone!" I really felt that moment of like she was really breaking down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies.
Mind that so the big iconic line in the book is when she says, "Till this moment I never knew myself." And there were a lot of people that were like, this is the most important line of the whole novel. And I read one critique where says this violates not only the spirit and the essence of Austen's story, but the viewer's expectations as well. I mean,
Interesting.
I feel like because it has been I feel like because it has been Lizzie's journey of transformation within this movie, we don't really need her to say that. We know that. We know
Hmm.
that till this moment, I never knew myself. It's obvious.
Okay, I did not know that that was considered the most iconic line in the book. So I don't I
Well,
don't
probably
know.
the most iconic line in the whole book is,
Well, it's the opening.
yeah, I was going to say, a gentleman of great
Yeah.
must be in want of a wife. Um, but uh, uh, but yeah,
Hmm.
I thought it was interesting because it didn't. I was fine with it because I'd seen her come to that moment of realization in so many other ways.
Right. Yeah.
So
I mean, there's that moment when she realizes who he is, and she's like, I was wrong. Who does she say that to? She says it to her aunt, I think, right? Or
yeah, yeah,
that was I was so
yeah,
wrong about him. I totally misjudged him or something like that,
yeah, because she's
which
prejudiced.
yeah, which I think really works in the movie.
Yeah. I love though. I mean, probably one of the best cinematography moments is her on that cliff.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great moment. I really loved that. And you get a sense of Lizzie's loneliness that especially once Charlotte leaves, that she doesn't and she's not as close to Jane in this as she is in the book. So you get a sense of her
Yeah.
being like pretty alone. on that cliff, and more isolated. And I love when Darcy sees her at Pemberley, and she like runs out of the house, and he's like, I like that. I think that's really fun. And she's like, Elizabeth, and that they both have that right degree of sort of uncomfortableness, which I think is fun.
Yeah.
And then his attempts to kind of woo her in Pemberley, introduce her to his sister, admire her, and then when his sister says, "Oh, my brother texts nothing but you and your piano playing,"
Yeah.
really good, really good.
Yeah, it's sweet. The movie does make that really work based on the characterization that they give him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the way they staged the whole scene with her getting the Lydia news, and she's just like the way she does the crying. That's some very good acting, I think, from Kira in that scene.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
when she realizes what he has done for all of that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that is the moment when she says, "I misjudged him," to his aunt, to her aunt. Yeah.
yeah. And the I also love the scene with Darcy helping Bingley with his proposal,
That's a
and
great addition too. I
Bingley's
was
going
gonna,
back
yeah.
and forth. Yeah,
That's a very sweet moment, and that did feel like a fun way to update the Jane Austen thing, to see it from that perspective, that without adding new words or new scenes to it per se, but just like a
yeah.
little glimpse at it. It was really good.
Yes. And then Jane gets engaged, and Darcy's kind of looking on and seeing what's happening. So that's good. I mean, one of the great things about British romance in general is the like longing looks. I could die for them. So it's like, I think you would be weirded out if anybody looked at you like that in real life, but in the movies, it's really fun. I love that. And he's very good at it. And seriously, I saw an interview not that long ago with Matthew McFadden where he was like that he felt miscast for this role, and he obviously was intimidated, Colin Firth and everything. But I think that sense of sort of a little bit of uncomfortable, a little bit of unease works for the character. This version,
It is funny because I think over the year, 20 years later, he feels even more miscast in a way, because he's become so known. I think a lot of people now know him as Tom from Succession. I don't know if you
yeah,
watched that show, but he's
he's a
very
jerk in it,
different.
right?
He's a total jerk, and he's not a likable character at all. So like,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people are like, "What? Tom is Mr. Darcy?" Like, I'd never think of
yeah.
him as like this romantic guy, and he's great in Succession, and he's really good here. And even in Joe Wright's next, I don't think it was his next movie, but after this, he did Anna Karenina, and he casts him
Oh,
as,
really?
yeah, he
Yeah.
cast him in a very different role, as a much closer to Tom. He's kind of like this, you know, raunchy kind of guy who's like more of a comedic character, and
Mhm.
a bit of a cad. So in a totally different tone, which was my first time when I saw him in that, I had the opposite reaction, like, what, Mr. Darcy is now this crazy guy,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Definitely. And so the uh the so then we get Lady Catherine coming. Of course, Judi Dench, incredible. And that's a great scene. Some really good acting between the two of them, I think. And it works very well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a classic Judi Dench role. You just get Judi
Yeah.
Dench, you deploy her, and she does her thing. So
Exactly.
it's nothing like, that surprised you too much, but I think it works.
But her whole family is listening in, and they're completely baffled. What is happening? So they have all these questions coming out. And I do love, she says, for once in your life, leave me alone.
Yeah, yeah, totally. That's the line that I was trying to think of before. I feel like that's probably my favorite moment of her performance. I think she delivers that so well after she's gone through this horrible, horrible scene with Judi Dench, and
Yeah.
she's like, I could feel it so much in her voice that she's just had enough. Like, it's, one thing after another, and she finally thinks that she can see this guy and for who he is, and something
Mhm.
might happen, and still everything is,
Yeah.
yeah.
So then we get the scene, the swoony scene, walking through the field. They're both walkers, fond of walking, and they My aunt.
Hmm.
And this is where we get the "you have bewitched me body and soul, and I never wish
Right.
to be parted to you from this day forward."
So what do you think of that, Rachel? It being an addition to the movie.
I'm a fan. I'm a
Yeah.
fan of I am not a traditionalist when it comes to literary adaptations. I there's hardly a version of this that I don't like. I'm very easy to please.
Hmm.
I'm famous for enjoying the zombies one. I just like it. So I'm not somebody who gets, that's just not me. But
Hmm.
but I lean into the swoon. I lean into the romanticism of it. I think it's great, and they have really good chemistry, I think. And so again, the novel doesn't have anything. It doesn't have any. We don't know what he said, so
Right.
you're almost forced. And so like I think, especially with the music and everything, just like swoon it up. It's fun. I like it. Yeah.
I think it works. It works in the tone that the movie has set for
Yeah.
itself. And I really love that well, that the most common version of the movie ends with Mr. Bennet and Elizabeth, right? I do think
Uh-huh.
that I love that scene where she goes when they go to talk to him right after that, and it kind of, because the version of Mr. Bennet that the movie presents is, I think, also a little bit different from the one in the book, and his love for Lizzie is more palpable in the movie. In the
Mm-hmm.
book, it's talked about, and he says it, and and we are told about it, but in the movie you see it a little more because it's
Yeah.
in Donald Sutherland's face, who I think he's really great in the movie as
Mm-hmm.
well, and he really sells that final scene when he's asking her, but I thought you hated him. And she's like,
Yeah.
no, I know,
Yeah.
I did, but I've changed my mind. And he's like, and he finally says like, yeah, like, I want you to be happy. And then it ends on his face. I think it's, and then there's that controversial last scene, but
Well, I mean, and she says he and I are so similar, which I think works for this version because it has been her who's changed.
yeah,
She's the
yeah.
one, not him. And or as much, at
Well, it's
least.
not really that she's changed either that much, but it's more like that she's learned that she misjudged him,
Mm,
that he is different from what she thought. So I
yeah.
think they're both really great for each other from the beginning. They
Yeah.
just don't know it because they're not
Yeah.
able to see it.
Well, and that's what Jane Austen does so brilliantly is that a lot, because a lot of people try to do the enemies to lovers. Very common trope. This is the ultimate example of that trope, kind of the the ancestor to
Hmm.
all of those films and books. And the problem that most of them get wrong is that both Lizzie and Darcy are shown as being completely likable to everybody else in their life, and everybody adores both of them, except for them. They just don't get along with each other. And the problem that a lot of enemies to lovers
Mm.
stories have is that they're completely hateful and awful. So you don't care that they get together. You don't want them to get together. You don't like either of these individuals. So it's just kind of miserable. And you're just like, it's what they get wrong so often is that there's so much humanity. And I think that's why, like, when you reach the halfway of the book and she's just said there is that she's the last man on earth I could ever marry, that you still have some degree of hope for this couple, and it draws you in to it, which
It's
it's
also
incredible.
It's also worth, yeah, not only that, but it's worth remembering back when it was written, it was not a trope that was as
Right. Yeah.
used as now. It was one of the earliest examples of it. So
Yeah.
when you reach the half point of that book, you
Yeah.
weren't sure if they were going to end
Yeah.
up together. Yeah, he is a jerk. You
Yeah.
are seeing it from Elizabeth's perspective as well. So, um, and that's important. I think what I like, I mean, you say that everybody loves him, but in the case of Darcy, it's a little more complicated because, the people in his life love him, but the people in Lizzie's life don't like him, right? Everybody
Yeah.
thinks
But
he's the
like, I mean,
knob and whatever.
Bingley is such a loyal friend to him. His
Bingley
sister
loves
loves
him.
him. His the servants at Pemberley love him. Like it's just we're given lots of reasons to assume that these two people are good people. They just don't that if they were to get together, that they would be a great match. They
Hmm.
just have this they just don't like each other, and that's what makes it work. And I'm just saying that a lot of friends to lover, I mean, a lot of enemies to lovers stories get that dynamic wrong.
I think you're onto something. My take on it would be I would go maybe a little bit to the side of what you're saying and say that to me the key is the that it's more people's perspectives on these people. It's I think sometimes when we make these movies, especially if we want to have a very broad appeal, we want to go back into the idea of like these guys are good, these guys are bad, these ones are likable, these ones are unlikable. You end up with something like in this movie Caroline, she's not a likable character, let's make her
Yeah.
really mean, and then you telegraph it a little too much. Whereas you can have complicated characters, just have it, have the people around them notice, like if
Yeah,
Darcy's kind of an
that's
idiot or
true.
is a jerk, have people say he's a jerk. And maybe there's good
Right.
qualities about him that Elizabeth will see. But I think disconnect is when the movie presents us two people who are horrible to each other and are really annoying as
Yeah.
characters. And they tell us, but aren't they great? And shouldn't they be
Yeah.
together? And you're like, no, I don't
Yeah.
like them.
You're right. That's very good. That's very good. That's very true.
That's what I like about, sorry, that's what I like about Phantom Thread is that they are not
Okay.
supposed
Yeah,
to
I
be
can see that.
likable. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, these people are impossible. I would never want to deal with any of them. I'm glad they made it work though, because
Yeah.
they
No,
couldn't have found anyone else who's going to put up with their stuff.
yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. Well, and so then we get our swoony ending, which yes is cut out of the British version of the
Mhm.
film. It'll be interesting to see. I haven't been to the screening, the 20th anniversary in theater screening. It'll be
Oh,
interesting to
which one
see
they're
which one
showing?
they do. Yeah, that's this upcoming weekend from when we're recording. But and he says, only call me Mrs. Darcy when you are completely and perfectly and incandescently happy.
Hmm. And why do people hate this so much?
I
Do you
just
know?
thought people are grumpy about romance. Yeah, like not everybody can lean into the cheese, like
Especially the
obviously
British.
the listeners of this podcast can because they watch Hallmark movies. So,
Hmm.
like someone like me is going to be fine with it. We like a little cheese in our romance. It's just some people, I don't know, it's too much, I guess, but I
Yeah.
like it.
Um, I I don't hate it. I do think that I think the scene with Mr. Bennett is such a great ending and such a better scene as a whole that I do think that's just a stronger ending. So why would you add this other thing? But I don't think it like ruins the movie or anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, let us know what you think of this version. I'd be very curious to the listeners. What do you think of this version? We've done a lot of Austen content over the years on the podcast, so I'll put a link. We have a whole playlist with all of our Jane Austen content. Plus, I have Jane Austen month over on my channel, and so where I've reviewed every single version, practically of Pride and Prejudice. So definitely check all of that out. And thank you so much for coming and doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time. I'm always happy to do some more podcasts with
Yeah,
you and,
yeah.
reminisce about Pride and Prejudice and also
Yes.
about our podcasting time together.
Yes. So if people want to follow you on socials or anything like that, do you have anything right now you're doing?
I guess the place where you would most able to find me is on Letterboxd. If anybody's on that, you can search my name, Conrado, or CO Falco 21, and then you can find me. And I
Yeah.
log movies. I do review them on Letterboxd pretty often.
Yeah. I'll put a
Um,
link. I'll put a link in the description. People can,
yeah,
that'd be
and
great.
actually, this is something that I've been working on. I don't know if this is up the Hallmarkies alley, but I am working on writing a bunch of essays and more writing to get people excited because I don't know if you know this, Rachel, the World Cup is coming to America
Oh,
next year.
nice.
So I'm writing a bunch of stuff about soccer, trying to get my friends in particular, but also anybody else who wants to join in the fun excited. So it's a lot of history about the World Cup, about soccer, fun stories, and analysis of what's coming up
Yeah.
next. So that kind of thing. That's gonna be out, hopefully starting in June, so a little bit
Yeah.
after this podcast. But if that sounds interesting at all to you, keep an eye on that.
Oh, cool. Okay, good. And you can follow me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out, and on Letterboxd. And make sure you're following the podcast, Hallmarkies Pod, Hallmarkies Podcast, all over social media. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. That really, really helps the algorithm a lot. The more reviews we have, we really, really appreciate it. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to 10K subscribers for the YouTube by the end of the year. And so if you are watching it, please subscribe. We would really appreciate it. And then we have our Patreon group, which is the biggest way you can support everything we do. We have bonus episodes. We have monthly watch-alongs and Q&As from talent. It's really fun. I try to make it really worth your while. And we have the merch store. We even have some Austin-inspired merch at the merch store. So check that out. And thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.